Alara paused her scanner, frowning at the anomalous readings flickering across its holographic display. The bustling marketplace of Cygnus X7 continued its chaotic dance around her, but she remained still, an island of concentration amid the sea of diverse alien life forms. Her bluish-green skin with its subtle bioluminescent patterns stood out even in this melting pot of interstellar species. As a Xylosian researcher, she had spent months gathering environmental data at this trading hub, particularly focused on the strange communication disturbances that had been increasing in frequency over the past cycle. She adjusted one of her multifaceted eyes, the geometric pupils contracting as she zoomed in on a particularly interesting data set. Something was interfering with the standard communication channels, creating patterns too regular to be natural. It reminded her of the discrepancies she'd been finding in the historical archives, subtle alterations that painted humanity in an increasingly monstrous light. The Scarlet Histories, the ancient records that described humans as brutal destroyers, ravagers of worlds, and merciless conquerors. Every Xylosian child grew up learning about the human threat, though actual encounters were vanishingly rare. Humans kept to their territories, and most species preferred it that way. Yet Alara had always been skeptical. The mathematical precision of her mind rebelled against the convenient neatness of these narratives. History was rarely so one-sided, and the increasing exaggeration in newer historical documents had triggered her researcher's instincts. She heard whispers among the merchants about an unknown vessel detected at the edge of the system days ago. Security had been heightened. Port Administrator Forlag had issued special directives for increased vigilance. The tension in the marketplace was palpable, an undercurrent beneath the veneer of normalcy. Alara didn't notice the tall figure approaching her, too absorbed in her data. He moved with the cautious confidence of someone trying not to attract attention while being completely out of place. Captain Marcus Vance of the Earth Exploration Force winced as his navigation device flickered and died in his hand. The emergency landing had been rough, damaging most of the scout ship's systems. The unexpected collision with space debris had forced him far off course, and now he was stranded in what appeared to be a major alien trading post. His EF uniform was dirty and torn in places, though he'd removed the more obvious insignia, hoping to blend in at least marginally with the diverse crowd. The settlement was like nothing he'd seen before, dozens of species intermingling in a riot of color, shapes, and sounds. The architecture itself seemed alive, with organic curves and pulsing light conduits. He needed to find replacement parts, or at least access to communication equipment, to contact the EF. His small scout ship, hidden in a ravine several kilometers outside the settlement, wouldn't fly again without substantial repairs. Vance scanned the crowd, looking for someone who might help. His eyes settled on a slender figure standing apart from the chaotic flow of commerce. The alien was clearly engaged in some scientific work, manipulating a complex scanning device. Scientists tended to be more open-minded, Vance had found in his explorations. Perhaps this one would help rather than immediately reporting him to local authorities. He approached carefully, composing a greeting in his mind. The universal translator embedded near his larynx would handle the conversion, but first impressions mattered regardless of species. Alara felt a presence and looked up. The scanner nearly slipped from her six-fingered hand. The being before her matched exactly the descriptions from the Scarlet Histories. The height, the bilateral symmetry, the flat facial features with forward-facing eyes, the absence of natural armor or bioluminescence. Every detail aligned with the ancient warnings. This was a human. Vance raised his hand in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace. "Excuse me, I was wondering if—" "A human! A human!" Alara's scream cut through the marketplace like a plasma blade. Her scanner clattered to the ground as she backed away, terror overwhelming her scientific rationality. Every childhood nightmare, every historical horror story, every warning crystallized into pure panic. The effect was immediate and electric. The marketplace erupted into chaos. Aliens of all species scattered in every direction, some diving for cover, others drawing weapons. Alarm klaxons began to wail throughout the port city. Wait, Vance called, but was useless. The blue-skinned alien was already fleeing, disappearing into the panicked crowd. Vance stood bewildered for a moment before his survival instincts kicked in. The hostility was unmistakable, and multiple security drones were already converging on his position. A voice boomed over the public address system in multiple languages. His translator rendered it clearly. Alert! Human infiltrator detected in Sector 7. All citizens evacuate. Security forces converge. Shoot on sight. Repeat. Shoot on sight. What the hell? Vance muttered as he dove behind a market stall just as a stun blast hit where he'd been standing. He didn't understand the extreme reaction, but he knew he needed to move fast. The security response was not the standard protocol for unauthorized visitors. This was a kill order. As Vance disappeared into a maintenance tunnel, Port Administrator Forlag watched the security feeds with gleaming eyes. His fingers, too long and thin to be natural, tapped a complex sequence into a secure communication device. The human has been identified, he reported. Contingency protocols activated. A voice responded, distorted and inhuman. Excellent. Ensure it does not escape. The timetable must not be accelerated. The humans must remain isolated until we are ready. Forlag's face remained expressionless. It will be done. Vance moved silently through the service corridors beneath the marketplace, his back pressed against cold metal walls as a security patrol passed by. His military training had kept him alive so far, but he was deep in hostile territory with no backup and no extraction plan. He'd managed to overhear enough security chatter to understand that the response to his presence went far beyond normal procedure. The repeated shoot on sight orders confirmed that something more sinister than simple xenophobia was at work here. They're talking about me like I'm carrying a plague, he whispered to himself, sliding deeper into the maintenance tunnels. He found a junction box and crouched behind it, taking a moment to consider his options. His ship was damaged, but not beyond repair. If he could acquire the necessary parts and return undetected, he might still escape this system and report back to EF headquarters. The hostility here was unprecedented and demanded investigation. Human explorers had encountered suspicion before, but never this level of institutionalized fear and hatred. As he planned his next move, a glint of metal caught his eye. The scanner. The blue alien had dropped it in her panic. Vance carefully retrieved the device, examining it curiously. Perhaps it contained useful information about the city's layout or security systems. Meanwhile, Elara had fled to her small research quarters in the science district, her heart still pounding frantically in her chest. She paced the room, trying to calm her breathing, to regain her analytical composure. The human's face kept flashing in her mind, not monstrous or snarling as depicted in the historical imagery, but confused, almost gentle. This doesn't make sense, she muttered, her voice still trembling. She'd spent her career questioning inconsistencies, following evidence rather than dogma. Why had she reacted with such blind panic? Then a cold realization washed over her. My scanner. All her research data was on that device. Months of catalog communication anomalies and evidence of historical record tampering. If it fell into the wrong hands, particularly those who might be responsible for the manipulations she'd detected, she glanced at the security alerts flashing across her communication terminal. The human was still at large, being hunted throughout the city. The response seemed disproportionate even for a human sighting. Elara closed her eyes, wrestling with her fear and her scientific integrity. Something wasn't right. She needed that scanner back, and deep down, she knew there was more to this situation than the official story. With trembling fingers, she disabled the room's automated security reporting system. What she was about to do could be considered treason, but her commitment to truth demanded it. She would return to the marketplace and retrieve her scanner, avoiding both the human and security forces. Hours later, as the port city's artificial night cycle began, Elara cautiously made her way back to the marketplace. The area had been cordoned off, but not completely sealed. The authorities couldn't shut down commerce entirely without causing unacceptable economic disruption. She slipped past the reduced security patrols, using her knowledge of the marketplace's layout to avoid detection. The spot where she'd encountered the human was deserted now, illuminated only by the dim emergency lighting. Her scanner was gone. Looking for this? Alara spun around, a scream rising in her throat that was quickly smothered by a human hand covering her mouth. The human from earlier stood there, holding her scanner in his free hand, his eyes intense but not threatening. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said quietly, "but I need you not to scream again. I think we both have questions that need answering. Not if you understand." Alara's mind raced. Every instinct told her to flee, but the rational part of her brain, the part that had questioned the inconsistencies in the historical records, held her in place. She nodded slowly. Vance removed his hand cautiously, ready to silence another scream if necessary. But the alien remained quiet, staring at him with multifaceted eyes that reflected the dim light like jewels. "Security patrol," she whispered suddenly, grabbing his arm and pulling him behind a storage container just as a hovering drone passed by, its scanning beam sweeping the area methodically. They remained frozen until the drone moved on. Then Alara gestured toward a small access door partially hidden behind display racks. "In there, quickly." Vance followed her into what appeared to be a storage room, filled with merchandise crates. It was cramped and dimly lit, but secure for the moment. "You didn't kill me," Alara said, her voice a mixture of confusion and wonder. "Why would I?" Vance replied, genuinely bewildered. "I just wanted directions. The Scarlet Histories say humans kill without provocation, that you destroyed worlds, enslaved species, that your touch brings death." She was watching him carefully, scientifically, cataloging every reaction. Vance's face registered shock, then understanding. "Propaganda. We've encountered it before, though never this comprehensive. Someone has been very busy ensuring you fear us." He handed the scanner back to her. "I didn't damage it. I thought it might have a map I could use to find my way out of the city." Alara took the device, surprised by the gesture. "Your ship. Damaged. I had a collision with debris that shouldn't have been there. Almost like it was deliberately placed in my path." He studied her face. "I'm Captain Marcus Vance, Earth Exploration Force. We're peaceful explorers despite what your Scarlet Histories claim." Alara hesitated, then made a decision. "I'm Alara, xeno-environmental researcher, and I think I might have evidence that the Scarlet Histories have been tampered with." She activated her scanner, showing him the data she collected. Communications have been systematically disrupted across this sector. Historical archives show signs of recent modification despite being classified as ancient. And the modifications all follow a pattern: increasing anti-human sentiment, isolating this sector from any potential human contact. Vance leaned closer, examining the data. "This is sophisticated work, far beyond simple xenophobia or political maneuvering. And now you appear, and the response is immediate and extreme," Alara added. "They're not trying to capture you for questioning. They want you eliminated before you can communicate with anyone." A heavy silence fell between them as the implications sank in. "We need to get this information out," Vance finally said, "both to my people and to yours. Someone is manipulating your entire culture, and I suspect the aim goes beyond just human-alien relations." "Port Administrator Forlag," Alara said suddenly. "He oversees the historical archives and controls access to the orbital station. And recently, he authorized the restoration of an old relay station on the outskirts of the city, exactly when these communication anomalies began." Vance nodded grimly. "Then we have two objectives: get evidence of this manipulation from Forlag's office, and investigate that relay station. I'll need parts to repair my ship or a way to send a long-range communication to the EF." Alara's bioluminescent patterns pulsed with anxiety. "What you're suggesting is extremely dangerous. Forlag's office is in the heavily guarded port administration tower, and helping you could be considered treason." "I understand," Vance said quietly. I won't ask you to risk your life. If you can just give me information about the city's layout. No, Elara interrupted, surprising herself with her firmness. My research, my responsibility. If someone is manipulating our history and using it to prepare for something worse, I need to be involved in stopping it. The corners of Vance's mouth turned upward slightly. A scientist to the core. I like that. For the first time since the marketplace, Elara felt something other than fear in the human's presence. Something that, against all her conditioning, felt remarkably like trust. We should move soon, she said, checking the time on her scanner. Security patrols shift in 20 minutes. There's a brief window when coverage is minimal. Vance nodded, checking the small laser cutter he'd managed to keep concealed in his boot. Lead the way. The service corridors beneath Cygnus X7's main thoroughfares were a maze of pipes, conduits, and maintenance tunnels. Elara moved with the confidence of someone who had mapped these passages meticulously, guiding Vance through the labyrinth while avoiding security checkpoints and drone patrols. You know these tunnels well. For a researcher, Vance observed as they paused at an intersection. Elara's skin flushed a deeper blue. The official archives don't always contain complete information. I've found that. Alternative research methods are sometimes necessary. You were already suspicious before I arrived, Vance realized. The data patterns were too perfect, too convenient, she explained. History is messy. These records were surgical in their precision. She checked her scanner. We're approaching the sublevels of the port administration tower. Security will be much heavier from here. They encountered their first real challenge at a security barrier requiring Port Authority credentials. Elara's access only extended to the science division. I can't bypass this, she admitted after several attempts. Vance examined the barrier thoughtfully, then reached into a pocket and extracted a small device. Universal Bypass Module. Standard EF equipment for emergencies. He attached it to the security panel and activated it. The barrier hummed and then slid open. Your exploration force comes prepared, Elara noted with a mixture of concern and admiration. For technical difficulties, not infiltration, Vance clarified. We've had to make emergency landings on uninhabited planets before. Sometimes you need to bypass your own systems when they're damaged. They continued upward, eventually reaching a maintenance access point near Forlag's office level. Elara checked her scanner again. Strange, she murmured. There's an energy signature here that doesn't match standard port technology. It's similar to the anomalies I detected from the relay station. Vance frowned. Can you locate the source? Elara adjusted her scanner settings. Forlag's private office. It's like a secondary communication system operating independently of the port's network. They exchanged a meaningful look. The evidence was mounting that Forlag was at the center of whatever conspiracy was unfolding. Using the maintenance shaft, they managed to reach a ventilation duct overlooking Forlag's office. The administrator was absent, but his workspace was illuminated by the glow of multiple data terminals. That doesn't look like any technology I've seen in the port before, Elara whispered, pointing to a crystalline structure on Forlag's desk that pulsed with an eerie purple light. Vance used a small scope to get a better view. Not like any tech I've seen either, and I've visited 32 different civilizations. They carefully removed the vent cover and dropped silently into the office. Elara immediately went to the main terminal while Vance examined the alien device. The security is extensive, Elara muttered, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface. But I know the architecture. There, I'm in. Data streams began to flow across the display as she bypassed the security protocols. Meanwhile, Vance had taken out a small analysis tool and was scanning the crystalline object without touching it. This thing is putting out radiation in spectrums I've never encountered, he reported. And there's something about its structure that seems wrong. Somehow organic and mechanical simultaneously. Vance, Elara's voice was tense. You need to see this. He joined her at the terminal, where she had uncovered a hidden communication log. The messages were in a code neither of them recognized, but timestamps and frequency patterns were clear. These communications began exactly when the historical record modification started, Ilera explained. And look at this: directives for the relay station, orders regarding human containment protocols, and plans for my arrest. You are getting too close, Vance said grimly. And this confirms my suspicions. Forlag isn't just spreading anti-human propaganda. He's acting on someone else's orders. These communication patterns are too regular, too structured to be organic. Ilera continued, digging through the files. Here, access code for the relay station. And, Vance, this is worse than we thought. The relay isn't just jamming communications or broadcasting propaganda. According to these specifications, it's building toward a massive energy pulse that could disable every ship and communication system in this sector. Isolation, Vance muttered. Complete isolation, making the entire sector vulnerable. To what? Ilera asked, fear evident in her voice. Before Vance could answer, the office door slid open. Port Administrator Forlag stood in the doorway, flanked by two security officers whose movements were unnaturally stiff and precise. To us, of course, Forlag said, his voice carrying an unnatural harmonic that made Ilera's skin crawl. Though I must admit, I'm impressed you've made it this far. The human survival was unexpected, but your collaboration is truly disappointing, Researcher Ilera. Vance moved protectively in front of Ilera, assessing their options. The security officers raised weapons that glowed with the same purple energy as the crystalline device. Who are you working for, Forlag? Vance demanded. What's the purpose of isolating this sector? Forlag's face twisted into an unnatural smile. Working for? You misunderstand, Captain Vance. I don't work for them. I am them. His form seemed to shimmer slightly, like a hologram with interference. Or rather, a small extension of them. The Vex have found this sector particularly suitable for integration, given its strategic position and diverse ecosystem of species. The Vex, Ilera whispered, the name unfamiliar and chilling. You've been hidden from records, Vance realized. That's why the EEF has no knowledge of your species. We are not a species, Captain. We are an evolution, a perfection. And soon, this sector will be the first of many to experience that perfection. Forlag gestured to his guards. Secure them. The human for dissection. The Xylosian for neural reconfiguration. She could still be useful. The guards advanced, but Vance was ready. He threw his analysis tool at the nearest guard, the small device exploding in a bright flash that momentarily blinded them all. In the confusion, he grabbed Ilera's arm and the crystalline device from the desk. The ventilation shaft, he shouted, helping boost her up before leaping after her. Behind them, Forlag was screaming orders, his voice distorting into something increasingly inhuman. They crawled rapidly through the shaft, hearing the guards pursuing them. Ilera led them to an access point that opened onto an external maintenance platform high on the tower's side. We can't go back through the building, she gasped. They'll lock everything down. Vance looked down at the dizzying drop, then up at the maintenance ladders that led to the tower's roof. Up. We need to get as far from here as possible, and your knowledge of the tunnels won't help if they're all being monitored now. As they climbed, alarm klaxons began to wail throughout the city. The night sky was soon filled with security drones and patrol vessels, searchlights sweeping across buildings and streets. They reached the roof and crouched behind a ventilation unit, catching their breath. The Vex, Ilera said, still processing what they'd learned. An unknown species with technology advanced enough to create synthetic duplicates or possess individuals like Forlag. They've been systematically isolating our sector, turning us against humans and probably other potential allies. And that relay station is the key to their next phase, Vance added. We need to get there and shut it down. Ilera checked her scanner, which was still downloading data she'd managed to extract from Forlag's system. The relay is located on a plateau, about 15 kilometers outside the city. There's a maintenance transport system that can get us close, but with the security alert, it will be heavily monitored. Vance examined the crystalline device he'd taken. Maybe we can use their own technology against them. This seems to be a communication node of some kind. If we can interfere with their coordination, A sudden explosion rocked the building beneath them. Through a cloud of smoke, they could see security forces breaching the roof access door. "No time for plans," Vance said. "We need to move now." What followed was a desperate chase across the rooftops of Cygnus X7. Vance and Alara leapt from building to building, using maintenance bridges and exterior lift cables to traverse the city skyline. Security forces and drones pursued relentlessly, but the urban terrain provided enough cover to keep them alive, if only barely. They finally reached the edge of the city, where the buildings gave way to the natural landscape of the planet, a terrain of crystalline formations and deep crevasses. The maintenance transport Alara had mentioned was visible in the distance, a cargo platform that moved supplies between the city and various outposts. "It's our best shot," Alara said, her breathing ragged from the prolonged chase. They made a final dash across exposed ground, drawing fire from pursuing security drones. Vance felt a stun blast graze his shoulder, sending numbing pain down his arm. They reached the transport just as it was preparing to depart, diving aboard among cargo containers as plasma fire scorched the platform around them. The transport began to move, gradually picking up speed as it left the city on elevated rails. Vance and Alara concealed themselves among the cargo, tending to their minor injuries. "That was too close," Alara said, helping bandage Vance's arm with a medical kit she'd found among the supplies. "And it's not over," Vance replied grimly. "They'll check the transport at the next stop, and they're likely already sending forces ahead to the relay station." Alara nodded, then hesitantly placed a six-fingered hand on his. "Why are you doing this? This isn't your world, your problem. You could have tried to escape on your own." Vance looked at her with steady eyes. "Because whatever these Vex are, they're a threat to everyone. Human, Xylosian, and every other species. And because—" He paused, a half-smile forming. "I couldn't let you face this alone after you came back for your scanner instead of staying safe." Something unspoken passed between them, a connection that transcended their physiological differences and cultural barriers. For a moment, the fear and urgency of their situation faded into the background. The moment was broken by Alara's scanner beeping. "I've decoded more of the data from Forlag's system," she said, examining the display. "The relay is set to emit its pulse in less than 2 hours. If it succeeds, every ship and communication system in the sector will be disabled, leaving us completely vulnerable to whatever the Vex have planned next." The transport was approaching a checkpoint. They could see security forces waiting at the station ahead, methodically searching each container. "We can't stay on board," Vance said. "We'll have to make the rest of the journey on foot." They slipped off the transport before it reached the checkpoint, dropping into the rough terrain below the elevated rails. The landscape was alien to Vance, but familiar to Alara, who led them through winding paths among the crystal formations. "The plateau is ahead," she said after they had been traveling for nearly an hour. "The relay station will be visible soon." They crested a ridge and saw it, an ancient communication array that had been heavily modified with technology that pulsed with the same eerie purple glow as the device from Forlag's office. Even from a distance, they could see security forces positioned around its perimeter. "I count at least 20 guards," Vance said, using a small scope. "And those aren't regular security officers. They move like the ones with Forlag. Too precise, too coordinated. Vex synthetics," Alara whispered. "Or possessed. Either way, they won't be easy to overcome." Vance studied the facility carefully. "There's a blind spot in their patrol pattern on the north side. If we can reach that maintenance entrance, we might be able to get inside." Using the crystal formations as cover, they made their way closer to the facility. The tension grew with each passing minute, both from the danger and the knowledge that time was running out. They reached the maintenance entrance without being detected, but found it securely locked. Vance prepared to use his bypass module when Alara stopped him. "Wait," she whispered. "Look at the lock mechanism. It's pulsing with that same purple energy. Your device might trigger an alarm if it interacts with Vex technology." Vance nodded in agreement. "Any other way in?" Alara consulted her scanner, which contained partial schematics of the original relay station before its restoration. There's an emergency coolant access port on the roof. In the original design, it was large enough for maintenance workers to enter. The climb to the roof was treacherous, with minimal handholds on the smooth exterior of the facility. By the time they reached the top, Vance's injured arm was throbbing with pain, and Alara's breathing was labored from the exertion. They found the access port, thankfully unmodified from the original design. It opened into a narrow shaft that led deep into the facility. They descended carefully, finding themselves in a maintenance corridor bathed in the unsettling purple light that seemed to characterize Vex technology. The primary control room should be this way, Alara whispered, consulting her scanner. And according to these readings, the energy buildup is accelerating. We have less than 30 minutes before the pulse. They move through the facility as quietly as possible, avoiding patrols of Vex control guards. The interior was a disturbing blend of the original relay station's technology and the alien modifications. Organic-looking circuitry grafted onto standard components, pulsating energy conduits threading through walls like veins. It's like they're not just controlling the technology, Vance observed. They're merging with it, transforming it. They finally reached the central control room, a circular chamber dominated by a pulsating energy core that hovered in the center. The walls were lined with control panels, some recognizable, others completely alien. A countdown displayed on a main screen showed less than 20 minutes remaining. We need to shut down the pulse generator and transmit the evidence we've collected, Alara said, moving to a control panel. If we can send out the truth about the Vex and Forlag to both my people and your EF, someone will listen. Vance joined her, examining the systems. If I can interface with the original communication array, I might be able to send a tight beam transmission directly to known EF patrol routes. But first, we need to disable that pulse. They worked feverishly, Alara attempting to decrypt the control systems while Vance prepared the evidence for transmission. The minutes ticked by relentlessly. I've almost got it, Alara said, her fingers dancing across the controls. The pulse generator requires a complex shutdown sequence, but I think I can. The door to the control room slid open. Forlag stood there, but he had changed. His form was now semi-transparent, pulsing with the same purple energy that permeated the facility. Behind him stood a dozen guards, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Your persistence is remarkable, Forlag said, his voice a harmonic discord that hurt their ears. But ultimately futile. The integration of this sector cannot be stopped. Integration? Vance demanded, positioning himself between Alara and the threat. You mean conquest? Such limited perspective, Forlag replied. The Vex offer perfection, the merging of organic and synthetic, the elimination of conflict through unity of purpose. Humans have always been resistant to such evolution. It's why you were excluded from our plans, why we cultivated fear of your kind. Isolation was merely the first step. You rewrote our history, Alara said, her voice trembling with anger. You manipulated cultures, turned species against each other. Necessary preparations, Forlag dismissed. The pulse will disable all technology not compatible with Vex systems. In the chaos that follows, assimilation will be swift and efficient. He gestured to his guards. Secure them. They will serve as useful study subjects during the transition. The guards advanced, but Vance had been subtly positioning himself near a control panel. He suddenly lunged, slamming his hand down on an emergency containment protocol button. Force fields sprang up, temporarily separating them from Forlag and most of his guards, though two were caught on their side of the barrier. A desperate fight ensued in the confined space of the control room. Vance disarmed one guard, using the captured weapon to neutralize the other, but not before taking a painful hit to his side. Alara continued working frantically at the controls. The force field won't hold them long, Vance warned, seeing Forlag interfacing directly with the barrier, purple energy from his form seeping into the system. I've accessed the transmission system, Alara reported. We can broadcast the evidence, but I can't stop the pulse without Forlag's command codes. Vance looked at the countdown. Less than 10 minutes remained. He made a quick decision. Send the transmission, then get ready to run. What are you planning? Alara asked, her multifaceted eyes wide with concern. Vance gestured to the pulsating energy core. That core is unstable. If overloaded, it would destroy the entire facility and prevent the pulse. But the only way to overload it would be to... Alara's voice faltered as understanding dawned. No, there has to be another way. There isn't time, Vance said gently. He handed her the crystalline device they'd taken from Forlag's office. This contains direct evidence of Vex communication patterns. Get it to your scientists and to the EEF. They'll need it to identify and counter Vex technology elsewhere. The force field was beginning to flicker as Forlag's influence corrupted its systems. They had minutes at most. Marcus, Alara said, using his first name for the first time. He smiled at her. Quite a change from screaming at the sight of me, isn't it? Despite everything, she found herself returning the smile, her bioluminescent patterns pulsing with emotion. I was terribly wrong about humans. Not your fault. Now go. There's an emergency exit through that maintenance corridor. It should lead you outside the facility's perimeter. Alara hesitated, then impulsively pressed her hand to his in a gesture that carried deep meaning in Xylosian culture. Your sacrifice will not be forgotten. Just make sure the truth isn't either, Vance replied, returning the pressure of her hand briefly before turning back to the controls. As Alara reluctantly fled through the maintenance corridor, Vance began the complex process of overriding the core's safety protocols. Behind him, the force field collapsed, and Forlag surged into the room with his remaining guards. Stop, Forlag commanded, his form now barely humanoid, more energy than matter. Too late, Vance replied, completing the final sequence. The core began to pulse erratically, its energy levels spiking dangerously. The transmission is sent. The sector will know what you are, what you planned. And this pulse won't be happening today. Forlag's form distorted with rage. You've only delayed the inevitable. The Vex are endless. We will return. Then we'll be waiting, Vance said, standing tall despite his injuries. In his final moments, he thought not of Earth or his service with the EEF, but of an alien researcher whose scream of terror had ultimately led to understanding and connection. There was hope in that, he decided. Hope worth dying for. The core detonated in a catastrophic release of energy. The relay station vanished in a blinding flash of purple-white light, the explosion visible for kilometers across the crystalline landscape. Alara, having reached a safe distance, watched in stunned silence as the facility was obliterated. Tears flowed from her multifaceted eyes, an emotion she had never expected to feel for a human. When she could move again, she activated the emergency beacon from Vance's equipment that he had given her before their final approach to the relay. Attaching the data crystal and her scanner, she configured it to transmit on the frequencies Vance had specified for EF patrols. The message would contain everything: the evidence of historical manipulation, Forlag's communications with the Vex, the specifications of their technology, and the sacrifice that had prevented their first major incursion. She watched as the beacon activated, sending its signal into the depths of space. There was no guarantee it would be received, but it was hope, frail yet persistent, like the strange connection she had formed with a human in the span of a single day. With renewed determination, Alara began the long journey back toward the city. Things would be chaotic now. The destruction of the relay station would not go unnoticed. Forlag's allies and possibly other Vex synthetics would be searching for her, but she had advantages they didn't anticipate. Her years of quiet, methodical research had given her knowledge of passages and safe houses unknown to most, and now she had a purpose that transcended her previous scientific curiosity. The truth needed to spread, both about the Vex threat and about humanity. One deception had enabled the other, and both needed to be exposed. As dawn broke over Cygnus X-7, rumors were already spreading through the port city. The destruction of the relay station had triggered widespread communication disruptions, but had also prevented the catastrophic pulse that would have disabled all technology in the sector. Port Administrator Forlag was missing, and security forces seemed to be operating without clear direction, many of them suddenly free of the strange influence that had been controlling them. Alara made contact with trusted colleagues in the scientific community, carefully sharing selected evidence with those she knew would examine it objectively rather than dismissing it out of fear or conditioning. The response was cautious, but increasingly supportive as the data spoke for itself. Within weeks, a movement had grown within the academic and scientific circles of Cygnus X7, calling for a formal investigation into the historical archives and the activities of the missing port administrator. The revelation that ancient historical records had been systematically altered created a sensation that couldn't be contained by those who might wish to maintain the status quo. It was during this period of upheaval that the response to the emergency beacon finally arrived. A diplomatic vessel from the Earth Exploration Force entered the system, approaching cautiously but openly, broadcasting messages of peaceful intent in multiple languages. The reception was mixed. Fear and suspicion still ran deep in many citizens of Cygnus X7, but the groundwork Alara and her growing network had laid created enough doubt in the anti-human narratives to prevent outright hostility. The ship was permitted to dock at an orbital station, where initial contact was established. Alara found herself appointed as part of the delegation to meet with the human representatives. She stood nervously in the station's diplomatic chamber, her bioluminescent patterns reflecting her anxious anticipation. When the doors opened and the human delegation entered, she was struck by their diversity, different skin tones, heights, and features, yet all unmistakably human. The leader of the delegation, a woman with dark skin and silver-streaked hair, approached Alara with a respectful nod. "Dr. Alara, I'm Admiral Chun of the Earth Exploration Force. We received your transmission and Captain Vance's data. On behalf of humanity, I thank you for your courage and your willingness to look beyond fear." Alara's universal translator rendered the words perfectly, but it was the sincerity in the human's eyes that truly communicated. "I only followed the evidence," she replied modestly. "It was Captain Vance who made the ultimate sacrifice." Admiral Chin nodded solemnly. "Marcus Vance will be honored among our greatest heroes. But your role was equally vital. You chose truth over conditioning, reason over fear. Such choices are the foundation of true understanding between different species." In the months that followed, relations between Cygnus X7 and humanity developed cautiously but steadily. The evidence Alara and Vance had gathered was supplemented by EF records of similar Vex activity in other sectors, always subtle, always focused on isolation and division, preparing for eventual integration. A joint task force was established to identify and counter Vex influence across multiple systems. Alara found herself working closely with human scientists, her expertise in detecting communication anomalies proving invaluable. The differences between their species became points of strength rather than division, each bringing unique perspectives and abilities to the challenge before them. One evening, nearly a year after the destruction of the relay station, Alara stood alone on the observation deck of an EF research vessel. They had just completed a successful operation to expose and neutralize a Vex outpost in a neighboring system, further disrupting whatever grand plan the mysterious entity had been developing. She gazed out at the stars, thinking of how differently things might have unfolded had she not dropped her scanner that day in the marketplace. Had Vance not approached her with a simple question, had she overcome her fear just a little sooner? "You're thinking about him again, aren't you?" Alara turned to find Dr. Tamara Wright, one of the human xenobiologists she had grown close to over the past months. The human woman had become adept at reading Xylosian emotional patterns in their bioluminescence. "Am I so transparent?" Alara asked with a small smile. "Only to someone who's been studying Xylosian biology for months," Tamara replied, joining her at the viewport. "It's okay to mourn him, you know, even though you knew him so briefly." "It's not just mourning," Alara said thoughtfully. "It's wondering what might have been, not just between us, but between our peoples if fear hadn't kept us apart for so long." She gestured at the vast expanse of stars before them. How many other civilizations are out there, hiding from each other, manipulated into isolation by entities like the Vex? Tamara, consider this. That's why what we're doing is so important. Every connection we forge, every false narrative we expose, weakens their strategy. The irony doesn't escape me, Ilaris said. My scream of terror at seeing a human ultimately led to the first real alliance against the Vex threat. Sometimes the path to understanding requires confronting our deepest fears, Tamara observed. Your courage to question those fears changed everything. They stood in companionable silence, watching as the ship entered the orbit of their next destination, a world where rumors of strange communications and historical revisionism had recently emerged. They'll try again, Ilaris said eventually. The Vex. We've disrupted their plans, but not defeated them entirely. Then we'll be waiting, Tamara replied, unconsciously echoing Vance's final words. Humans, Xylosians, and every other species that values freedom over integration. Ilara's bioluminescent patterns brightened with determination. She thought of the frightened researcher she had been, screaming at the sight of human, and marveled at the journey that had brought her here, working alongside humans, fighting to protect multiple species from a common threat. A human, she whispered, remembering her terrified cry in the marketplace. A human, she repeated, this time with reverence for what that term now meant to her. Courage, sacrifice, and unexpected friendship across the stars. As the ship descended toward the planet below, Ilaris silently renewed her promise to honor Vance's sacrifice by continuing their shared work, uncovering truth, building bridges between civilizations, and ensuring that fear would never again be a weapon used to keep potential allies apart. The battle against the Vex was far from over, but they no longer fought alone in isolation. And in that unity lay their greatest strength, a lesson written in the stars and sacrifice, and in the unlikely friendship between a human explorer and an alien researcher who once ran screaming at the sight of him.